Hello, church, and welcome to the fourth of our Advent Wednesday wanderings. Well, today we're at 9, so we're going to light 4 candles. Some of you will get the reference to that, others won't, and then we're going to share some Bible reading, some reflection, and a song. So today we're going to light the candles for hope, for peace, for love, for joy, all 4 of them. Right. For hope, for peace, for joy, and for love. So today's reading comes from Luke chapter 1, verses 57 to 80, and it says this. When it was time for Elizabeth to have her baby, she gave birth to a son. Her neighbours and relatives heard that the Lord had shown great mercy, and they shared her joy. On the 8th day, they came to circumcise the child, and they were going to name him after his father, Zechariah. But his mother spoke up and said, "No, he's to be called John." They said to her, "There is no one among your relatives who has that name." Then they made signs to his father to find out what he would like to name the child. He asked for a writing tablet, and to everyone's astonishment, he wrote, "His name is John." Immediately his mouth was opened and his tongue set free, and he began to speak, praising God. All the neighbours were filled with awe about all of these things. Everyone who heard this wondered about it, asking, "What then is this child going to be?" For the Lord's hand was with him. His father, Zechariah, was filled with the Holy Spirit and prophesied this. "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, because he has come to his people and redeemed them. He's raised up the horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David. And he said through his holy prophets long time ago, salvation from our enemies and from the hand of all who hate us, to show mercy to our ancestors and to remember his holy covenant, the oath he swore to our father Abraham, to rescue us from the hand of our enemies and to enable us to serve him without fear, in holiness and righteousness before him all our days. And you, my child, will be called a prophet of the Most High, for you will go on before the Lord to prepare the way for him, to give his people the knowledge of salvation through the forgiveness of their sins, because of the tender mercy of our God, by which the rising sun will come to us from heaven, to shine on those living in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the path of peace." And the child grew and became strong in spirit, and he lived in the wilderness until he appeared publicly to Israel. Well, I wonder if you've ever taken part in a sponsored silence, or perhaps you've been on a silent retreat. Now, it won't surprise many of you to know that I'm not very good at a sponsored silence, and a silent retreat is like my idea of hell. Some of us find it tricky to stay silent, and I can't imagine that for Zechariah it was easy either. See, we come in at the tail end of the story where the silence is broken, but we need to reverse back a few verses to see that actually it was at the beginning of the pregnancy that he became silent. Now, 9 minutes is hard for some of us to remain silent. When we try silence in church, it's quite funny because some people really struggle with either just a minute or 2. Some struggle with Remembrance Sunday for that reason. In the silence, they get a bit awkward, and sometimes we laugh and sometimes we do funny things. But Zechariah had 9 months of it. I wonder what it was like for Elizabeth. I guess that they were probably used to talking. I mean, I would hope so. They've been married a long time by this point. And then all of a sudden, nothing. Silence. And I guess in reality, a bit like when you've got a sore throat or tonsillitis, you learn to communicate in other ways. So I'm sure that they learned to communicate in other ways and worked around it. But then to have him silent through the end of the pregnancy, when things were often a little trickier, a little more difficult, I wonder how it worked then. I wonder what Elizabeth felt. I wonder if she knew when the silence would break. Did she have hope that it would? Maybe she quite liked it. And sometimes these things seem a little bit ridiculous, don't they? And trivia. Like, why is that in the story? Well, it's in the story because when the silence is broken, when finally he does speak, he says some quite profound words. He speaks a new story. He speaks of love and joy. He speaks of the truth of who not only his son is, but who Jesus is. And so the people would have known about this silence. Anyone in the community who goes silent for 9 months, you can be sure that others will find out about. And then he breaks it. And it's all over the point of a name. And we've talked before how names have meaning and are important. And the people say to Elizabeth, that name's not part of your family name. But she knows it's what God's called her to call him. And so Zechariah breaks his silence and he does this beautiful monologue where he reminds everybody of what has been said before and gives a foretaste of what will come. And it's great because we've got hindsight, haven't we? So we know this story. We know that the words about Jesus have been spoken before, and then Jesus comes and he lives and he dies and he's resurrected. We know what that hope means for so many people. But in this moment, at this time, there is something so sacred going on that God interrupts and breaks into the silence. And even though the name is not their family name, and even though that means that John won't have Zechariah's name to carry on with him through life, the lineage of that name will be broken. He affirms what Elizabeth knows because it's what God's called. It's beautiful, isn't it? And a beautiful picture and story of love, of two people journeying together into what seemingly looks like an unknown interruption. Can't imagine it was an easy time. And then working together under God to be able to share that message with people, messages that we read are shared with others. God was with them. I want you to reflect today on whether you've had a time of enforced silence and how that's felt. Did it mean that when you communicated with those afterwards that communication was all the more important? For me, in this last 2 years of COVID, not being able to see people has been difficult. Because as much as Zoom and videos and things like this are great, it's not the same. What I've really missed, and I don't know about you, is the banter that can only happen when people are in the same room. The stifling of the Zoom room means that you don't get that sparkiness because the mute button has to be unpressed. You cut over each other. And yet when you're in a room with someone, you can have side conversations. You can spark off each other and you know what a look means, even when you don't use any words. And I really miss that. But what it has been, though, is it has made me value the time that I do have with people even more. So the snippets of moments that I've had with my mum and my sister over the last 2 years have been quite precious. I've probably invested more in them than ever before. I wonder how that's been for you. And then I've been thinking about Zechariah and Elizabeth and how the silence might have changed their relationship. What would they have learned about each other? And it got me thinking about my own relationships and particularly thinking about my kids. How the relationship shifts and changes how they grow and I grow. I was 17 when I had Reese, not much older than Mary, when Mary had Jesus. I often say that we dragged each other up, but there's some truth in that. I was a kid growing and developing, learning. He was a kid growing and developing and learning. And there were times where that took us on a little difficult and rocky path. There are still times we're still human. But there were other times where our growing together was just foundational. There are moments that I'll treasure forever. And then George came along, and there were moments for them to grow and change and be together. And there are moments that continue. She lives with me still, so continue to grow and change as our relationship shifts. And now I share my house with an adult who's my kid, but an adult. Now, friends, when you have a baby, they tell you that that's tough. Nobody tells you that parenting an adult is tough, but it is. So I wonder about your relationships with other people. Can you think of some significant relationships that have shifted and changed over time as you've grown together? What has that been like in the longevity? In what ways has that reflected God's love? And how have your views and thoughts on God's love changed and shifted as those around you have changed and shifted, as you've understood a little bit more that love is not a soft and fuzzy thing on a greetings card, but is so much more. Love is complex and love is messy. It doesn't always take the paths that we hope for. But the love that we see in the story of Jesus, in his life, in his death, in his resurrection, is one of sacrifice, is one of putting others first, is one of practicing the fruit of the Spirit. And so I pray this Christmas that whatever it looks like for you, you may know a love that is sacrificial, whether that's staying away from those that you would really rather be with because you love them and want them to stay well, whether that's somebody giving up a seat for you on the bus so that you can get a smoother ride home, whether that's the kindness of a stranger in a supermarket as you both dive for the last turkey. May you know that you are loved, not because of anything you've done, but because of who God is. A God that so loved the world, he gave his only Son. We're going to listen to a song in just a moment, a song that speaks of the overwhelming, reckless love of God. And when this song came out, I didn't really like it to start with, I'm not going to lie. I don't want to think of God as reckless. But when I think about how he loves us, it's pretty reckless by the world's standard. So may you know the reckless love of God. May it overwhelm you and encompass you this Christmas. Take care, friends. Bye.
Before I spoke a word, you were singing over me. You have been so, so good to me. Before I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. You have been so, so kind to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. was your foe, still your love fought for me. You have been so, so good to me. When I felt no worth, you paid it all for me. You have been so, so kind to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up,